I would like to invite our opening welcome addressee, Professor Stephen Warburton, the Assistant Vice-Chancellor, Digital Futures of Victoria University, and also a proud co-host of this event. So, Mr. Warburton, are you in the room? Yes, thank you very much. So, homai te paki paki, and that means big clap.
Perfect. Yes, I was a little late, so I am actually quite pleased to be here. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Just to say, it's a real pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you, friends, colleagues, and honourable guests who've come here for the 2019 Identity Conference. And what more fitting place to have an identity conference than here at Te Papa, the National Museum of New Zealand, and the theme, Identity as Tonga. So I think it's really, and indeed my phone is now going off as well. This is my first identity conference, and I think, as I've already kind of signalled there, this is part of an ongoing series of conferences that have a rich history, and I would sort of describe them as an extended discussion, debate, interrogation of the ongoing social, technical, and cultural shifts that are changing our understanding of the nature of identity in a modern society. So that is a bit of a mouthful, but what I'm trying to say there is identity is quite complex, and there are many different perspectives to take on identity as well. And the joy of this kind of conference is you get to listen to lots of different speakers coming from different observational points of view on what identity and what makes up identity and how we are dealing that in a changing society. I couldn't quite track down the first conference details. Maybe Alan might know more than me, who's down there, but it started in 2008, developed through to 2012 with a conference on managing digital identity in a networked world, which asked how we might maximise the benefits and minimise the risks around identity and privacy in an increasingly digitised and connected ways of living, working, socialising, shopping and playing. And I like the shopping. The conversation was picked up again in 2015, when the conference examined the theme of enabling digital identity and privacy in a connected world, and asked how we might maximise the benefits and minimise the risks around identity and privacy, again, in, how we might, in fact, I've just repeated myself there. The first conference was looking at management digital identity. The last one in 2015 was looking at connected ways of living, working, and shopping in a digitised world, so excuse me. So I recognise that I'm going to probably repeat the words of many previous openings at those conferences by saying much has changed in recent years. Even in that relatively small leap from the conference in 2015, I think we really have entered a world where, I go with other commentators and see it as being particularly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that's perhaps reflected in the kinds of headlines we are picking up. We're seeing fake news, ideas around the erosion of truth, sustained attacks on privacy, and the increasingly irregular high-profile data breaches that we were experiencing, and as well a lot on the headlines around the fourth industrial revolution as well, the coming of robots to take our jobs, and certainly worries and I would say a lot of uncertainty around where artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, and even things like brain-based computing are going to take us as we enter what I would see as another major technological cycle. So we're looking at another leap forward. So the world is changing, and perhaps faster than ever. And when I start to talk about change, it does actually always remind me of Ray Kurzweil, who is, some of you may know, an American inventor. He worked in the field of AI. He's also a futurist. He's probably most famous for his book, The Singularity is Near. A little bit more of that later. And also the law of accelerating returns as well. So what he suggested is that it's really hard for us to see the pace of change. It's really hard for us to imagine what the future might look like, because he says change is exponential, and our brains are wired to only see linear change. So wherever we are, it looks like, for us, even exponential, it looks like change is linear. So it makes it very difficult to comprehend what is coming. So how do we make sense of these rapid changes that are often and so deeply connected to digital transformation? And sort of in writing this introduction, it took me back to some of the earlier conversations that I was having around identity at the time of the first conference here, back in around 2008. I was working in the area of digital identity myself. At that moment in history, we would experience just the rapid rise of social media. The internet had changed, it moved away from one which is mostly a consumerist version to one which was much more of an architecture of participation. So it shifted to a medium where we were able to share our insights, ourselves, and parts of our identity and personality. And it's at that time that the big corporations like Facebook came along. And to try and understand what was happening in terms of identity, for me, one of the, and I still think it runs true today, one of those writers was actually from the 1950s, was Goffman, and reading Goffman's work on the presentation of the self in everyday life. That provided some sense to understand how we think about identity and how we think about identity ourselves as performance and where is it embedded, and how the nature of those digital tools really shifted our sense of who we were. It massively increased, at that time, the visibility of digital identities, and really made us aware that that construction of identity had shifted well outside the control of any one person. So identity became, and still is, not only the things that we say, but also the things that are said about us by others, and all our activity in any electronic exchange with both human and intelligent agents. And I think that's something to bear and go back to as we go through the conference. Today, it is actually virtually impossible to remain at the margins of digital life and the production of an online identity. So our digital footprints tell the world who we are, no matter if we like it or not, no matter if they are correct or not. So we should take care of them. And I think that's one of the themes of the conference. How do we take care of that digital identity? But I would also question, is that a bad thing? So what actually happens in a hyper-network society? Surely, we must know about people if we are to arrange our social life. So if I put that bluntly, I'll change the phrasing here a little bit. Surveillance is a prerequisite of effective social organisation. So you may want to argue with me later around that. So organisation and observation are what I'd call conjoined twins that have grown together with the development of the modern world. So the theorist Anthony Giddens, the social theorist Anthony Giddens, argues that we've always been an information society, so some things are not particularly new. And he asks, is surveillance a corollary of the observational imperatives that accompany a more organised way of life? Well, yes, and maybe that is the information society that we might recognise from the early 2000s. But other academics have recognised more disturbing patterns in our data-rich lives. And I will just read, I apologise it's a long quote, but I just want to read something from, and I put this at the beginning of the handbook. I talked a little bit about surveillance culture, and Shoshana Zuboff in particular in her writings has raised, it's a really interesting work, it's very big. I do recommend you go and have a look at the succinct abstracts of it. But she talks about surveillance capitalism, which I think is really interesting for this conference as well to touch on. So, surveillance capitalism, I'll read this out, unilaterally claims human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioural data. Although some of these data apply to service improvement, the rest are declared as a proprietary behavioural surplus fed into advanced manufacturing processes known as machine intelligence, and fabricated into prediction products that anticipate what you will do now, soon, and later. And I think we've all got some experience of that. I think that resonates. Finally, these prediction products are traded in a new kind of marketplace that she calls, behavioural future markets. Surveillance capitalists have grown immensely wealthy from these trading operations, for many companies are willing to lay bets on our future behaviour. Really interesting insight and rethinking, along with Piketty on the way that capitalism is working and using data as part of that. And I would say as well, we may think that what I've just said there is only part of the domain of the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples, the Facebooks. But I work in the field of education, and I have done for a long time, and I do see parallels of this kind of betting on the future within the educational sector as well. Already we have our learners producing huge amounts of data. We have the tools now to do quite detailed analytics, and we have those tools to look at predict who may pass and who may fail. And there certainly is a deep ethical and moral question about how we make choices of intervention when we know or can suspect whether our learners and who do we choose to make interventions with. And I'm just going to give another quote as well. So this one is from Michael Rosen, who is, you might know, he's a children's book author from We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And he had a little bit of a tirade in the UK. So there's a real backlash in the UK recently around technology in schools. And Michael Rosen effectively was saying that we are technology like drugs for children, and that, in fact, we are the pushers of drugs on children, the technologies. And he was very anti-technology and wanted to actually take some of the technology back out again. So he made a comment on Twitter, which was you can find and look at all the replies to, but I'll just read his comment out, which was to some quite disturbing. So he wrote, "First they said they needed data about the children to find out what they're learning. Then they said they needed data about the children to make sure they are learning. Then the children only learnt what could be turned into data. Then the children became data." So, an interesting quote. And again, I think that resonates as well, and I can't get that sense that our identity is very much becoming a part of our data stream, and how much we are becoming entwined and very difficult to escape from those digital traces that I mentioned earlier. Now, I am going to take the time because I realise we're on a schedule and my time is nearly up. So I don't really have time. I had a small piece about looking at where we're going with the future about artificial intelligence. I think that is the big shift that is coming. We only have to look, and I caught, the one that caught me recently was just thinking about AI, the AI engines, and it was 1997 that Deep Blue came on and beat Kasparov at chess. Recently, the latest algorithm now have beaten a human player in the game of Go, which is the most sophisticated human game that we play. So now a computer can beat that Go. Just showing how those leaps and bounds are moving forward. And again, going back to Ray Kurzweil's comment, whether you like his thoughts about the singularity or not, where machines become as intelligent as us, we really need to be thinking, and I think that's one of the questions I'll leave for this conference as well, is what that combination as well of artificial intelligence and human looks like. How do we build a relationship with machines? So it isn't about machines coming and taking over. It's about building relationships with machines and working intelligently with them. So chess didn't die because Deep Blue built Kasparov, to go back to the analogy. I mean, what actually happened, it reinvented how chess is played. So there is now some comment as a kind of centaur of chess, which is where machines and humans play together, and the humans choose appropriate chess moves with a machine against another human doing the same. So there are different kinds of relationships that we can imagine before we go down the road or the rabbit hole of looking at a dystopian future where we lose control. Final words. I really think as well, something that I'm interested in certainly is really, this conference is about identity as Tonga, and I would really ask, what kind of leadership do we need as well? Do we need different kinds of leadership in this particular age? A kind of leadership that understands what digital transformation looks like and protects and safeguards our identity. And really for me, how does that leadership help bring what I would see as dramatic transformations at the moment safely to scale for all of us? So I'll leave you with those thoughts. Hopefully some of those might be answered. We have an absolutely fantastic set of speakers over the next 2 days, so I'm really excited to hear that, speakers and panels. And I will hand over to the next speaker. I don't have any notes for the next one, so thank you very much, everyone. Have a fantastic conference. I really look forward to it.